Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're looking at the recently released Devil May Cry 5 and seeing how it compares to its 2008 predecessor, Devil May Cry 4. Yes, there was a Devil May Cry reboot that came out in 2013, but because that game is so drastically different from the core titles in the series, I feel a comparison between the fourth title seems more appropriate. That being said, Devil May Cry 4 came out over 10 years ago, so it should be no surprise that the most recent title that just came out this week will look significantly more impressive. So this is not so much a competition as it is an observation of how the visuals and gameplay mechanics have evolved over such a long period of time. For this comparison, both games are being run on the PC with a native 1440p resolution and their settings pushed as high as possible, but the motion blur will be disabled for the sake of image clarity. Also, due to the nature of these types of games, the visual aspect of this comparison won't be as detailed as it normally would be. And so, to add a little bit more to this comparison, I'll also be detailing some various gameplay changes that I've noticed as well. Alright, so let's start by looking at a few character models, starting with Nero. The quality of the character models has been improved substantially, going from a highly detailed design to something that appears near photorealistic by comparison. The facial animations are more natural than they were in the old game, and the quality of every texture is now pristine. The design for the character himself has also changed. Rather than sporting the long white hair like in DMC4, Nero now has much shorter, spiky hair. Nero is also sporting a brand new robotic arm, replacing his demonic Devilbringer arm from Devil May Cry 4, and I'll go into more detail about that in a bit. Dante, on the other hand, looks practically identical in terms of his design. He appears slightly older now with more visible facial hair and a few more wrinkles, but his outfit design closely resembles the outfit from DMC4. Again, graphically, Dante looks incredible when compared to the old model. The characters have gone from looking like cartoons to looking near lifelike. Also, both characters now feature dynamic cloth and hair simulation physics, which really helps to make the characters feel like they're physically part of the world they're fighting in. Animations have also changed a great deal. The animations in the older game are incredibly stiff, yet responsive, making it easier to maneuver the environment and fight enemies reliably. Devil May Cry 5, however, has introduced smoother animation work that adds a slight delay to some of the maneuvers that will take a bit to get used to. The combat is still very responsive, but jumping around the world and running feels much different now. Next, let's talk about the environmental design of both games. In Devil May Cry 4, the player travels across a fictional European-looking city with both French and Italian-inspired architecture mixed with a lot of Gothic themes. While a brighter overall game than the original three titles, Devil May Cry 4 still managed to retain that Gothic aesthetic that the series had been known for at the time. Devil May Cry 5 appears to have abandoned this art direction entirely in lieu of something much more modern. Most of the game takes place in various city streets and demonic caverns, giving the overall presentation a very different feel. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this change, but it's definitely the largest departure in terms of art direction in the main series. That being said, the environments are incredible looking thanks to Capcom's in-house RE engine, the very same engine used to build the beautiful environments in Resident Evil 7 and the recent RE2 remake. The streets are loaded with high-resolution surfaces and a large number of destructible props. The Devil May Cry games have always had destructible environmental props like bookcases and tables, but Devil May Cry 5 takes this a step further, with debris from destroyed objects not immediately disappearing. This looks very impressive, especially during some of the larger fight sequences with a ton of destructible objects in the area. Other changes include much larger levels, with seamless loading transitions built into various animations like this one. The original games would split off various areas with doors, similar to the old Resident Evil titles. But now that game platforms are no longer as technically limited, each level in Devil May Cry 5 plays as a seamless experience, which greatly improves the overall pacing. Now, let's take a closer look at the lighting use in both games. Devil May Cry 5 makes use of true dynamic lighting effects, with several different points of direct light in the environments properly illuminating both objects and character models, while also accurately casting shadows. The original game's art direction didn't allow for this type of lighting design, and instead utilized a more static solution, with environments being preset to specific conditions to help make the scene as clear as possible. This worked fine for the fixed cameras used in DMC4, but Devil May Cry 5 utilizes a manual camera system, much like the recent God of War game. With this type of camera design, the developers can no longer get away with pre-baked lighting solutions, and so more realistic lighting was implemented instead. The result is a far more impressive presentation, and one that still delivers the fun arcade action that fans have come to expect from Devil May Cry. Next up, let's look at a few effects. The most obvious change here is the increased amount of complex particles during the fight sequences and the high level of destructibility in the game environments. As I said before, destroying props in DMC4 causes the pieces to disappear almost immediately, But the new game preserves the broken pieces, resulting in some awesome transformative combat encounters, like this early boss fight inside the church. Things like fireballs have more complexity, and also properly cast light that reacts to both the character model and the environment in a way that the original game just could never accomplish. And water effects, while incredibly rare in both games, have also seen an improvement, and various puddles and pools will now react slightly to player interaction. And now, we get to the gameplay changes, starting with the way the upgrade system works. In Devil May Cry 4, players would kill enemies with stylish combos and be rewarded red orbs. These red orbs could be spent on things like health revives and increased devil trigger time. Upon completing levels, players were also rewarded with Proud Souls, another currency that could be used to purchase new combat moves and abilities. The Proud Souls have been removed from Devil May Cry 5, and players now will only need to manage the standard red orb currency, just like the original 3 games. To access the upgrade menu, players used to have to find a large hourglass statue in the game world. These statues are still in Devil May Cry 5, but aren't as common as the phone booths, which can be used to call in series newcomer Nico. Nico will drive into the area in dramatic fashion in a big Devil May Cry van and acts as the new storefront to upgrade skills in the game. You can even see the little hourglass statue sitting on her desk in the menu. Next, let's talk about the combat. Surprisingly, Devil May Cry 5 retains almost exactly the same control scheme as the classic titles. Holding R1 or RB on the controller will cause the player to lock onto the nearest enemy, and pressing the triangle or Y button will initiate standard sword attacks. Players can jump into the air, fire their pistols, and even dodge to the sides just like in Devil May Cry 4. But there is one very noticeable addition, the Devil Breaker. In Devil May Cry 4, the character Nero had a crazy-looking demonic arm called the Devil Bringer. But this arm has been replaced in Devil May Cry 5 by a series of mechanical arms called Devil Breakers. There's a ton of different types of robotic arms that the players can equip, each with unique abilities that can be used to really mix up the combat experience. The Devil Breaker also still retains the grappling ability from Devil May Cry 4, though it does feel a bit more consistent than it did in the old game, which is good considering how annoying some of the platforming segments were before. Another big change to the experience is series newcomer V. V calls forth demonic animal buddies to do all of his fighting for him. The triangle or Y button calls in a panther for standard melee attacks, while a bird is used for his ranged attacks. Controlling these animals simultaneously while also avoiding direct confrontation feels a bit weird, but it's a really cool idea nonetheless. Enemy types have also seen a few changes. The original marionette design for the enemies from Devil May Cry 4, and even Devil May Cry 1 actually, has been replaced with the heavier focus on the more mutated insectoid type enemies. Though I did notice a few very similar enemy types throughout the experience, including the heavily armored knights and the classic scissor-wielding Sin enemies. The method for defeating these enemies remains consistent with Devil May Cry 4, and really the only change here is the ability to mix in new combat moves. Dante's combat has also changed with a ton of unique attacks involving his motorcycle in various different styles, but I'll need to detail those later with my final review planned for next week. The general takeaway here is that the gameplay design of Devil May Cry 5 is incredibly faithful to the polished design of Devil May Cry 4, and the biggest changes are the additions of new combat moves to help make the experience more interesting. And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. As you can clearly see, Devil May Cry 5 is a step up in almost every way. The game's more dynamic lighting, highly destructive environment, and absolutely incredible looking character models feels like a genuine 11-year improvement. And what's better is that this huge graphical overhaul hasn't hurt the general style of the gameplay. The RE engine has proven its worth once again, and I'm excited to see what Capcom has planned next with it. But what do you guys think? Do you like the improvements made to Devil May Cry 5? Or did you prefer the art direction in the older titles? Let me know in the comment section, and be sure to stay tuned for my final review next week. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this posted every week.